This is a story about the moment I witnessed a life-changing event in just one night. My name is John. I'm a regular office worker who just turned 60 this year. Although I am a department manager, I've been contemplating whether it's time to step down. At home, I have a wife of the same age and 2 daughters. Both daughters are married and have blessed me with 4 grandchildren. It's a plain life, but I believe I can spend a peaceful and happy retirement. By this age, I don't expect any significant changes in the direction of my life. I think many people feel the same way. Of course, I'm one of them. My life hasn't been about achieving great things, but I am content with what I have. I thought being able to spend the rest of my days peacefully would be the greatest happiness. I think so. But it seems the triggers for significant changes in everyday life can be found in unexpected places. In my case, it was a school reunion. In the summer of the year I turned 60, I received an invitation to a middle school reunion. Thinking back, I vaguely recall discussing having reunions at our coming-of-age and 60th birthdays when we graduated from middle school. But after more than 40 years, I hadn't expected it to actually happen, and I have completely forgotten about it. However, the prospect of meeting old friends after decades was very appealing, and I was eager to attend. With encouragement from my wife, I decided to go to the middle school reunion. Little did I know then the unexpected events that were to unfold. When I arrived at the spacious private room of the restaurant hosting the reunion, I was one of the first to arrive. Only one other person was there. Having last seen each other at our coming-of-age ceremony 40 years ago, I couldn't recognize who it was. "Long time no see, I'm John." When I timidly spoke up, the other person said this. Hi Mike, it's been a while." Mike. Hearing that name, I felt an unpleasant memory I had almost forgotten resurfacing. Mike and I were in the same class in the 2nd and 3rd years of middle school. He was a perfect all-rounder, good in both academics and sports, and even served as the student council president. He was also popular with the girls because of his good looks. However, he was quite disliked among the boys. The reason was, "Hey, John, lend me that handout." This one. As I sat down at my desk in the morning and held the homework handout, Mike said that to me. He almost forcibly took the handout I had, erased my name written in the name field, and wrote his own over it. "What are you doing? Shut up. A plain and short guy like you just needs to listen to what I say, whether you bring your homework or not. Your lousy grades won't change." Mike was the kind of guy who would forcefully push his own way. It was clearly an unfair and wrong act, but he was a popular figure with power within the school. As a middle school student at the time, facing such overwhelming influence, I couldn't protest any further. Mike generally had this attitude towards most of the boys, but it seemed I was particularly targeted. I was often sent on unnecessary errands to the school store, had my lunch thrown away, and sometimes even had money taken from me. But he was smart. He never did anything that left evidence, maintaining his position until graduation. After middle school, we went to different high schools, and I remember he didn't attend the reunion at the coming-of-age ceremony because he was studying abroad. He was the last person I wanted to see again, yet here we were, meeting after 40 years. Now, both of us are stepping into old age, 40 years later. I didn't want to believe that childish bullying would happen again, but the fear ingrained in my heart made my body tense involuntarily. "Good to see you again. Have you been well?" Ignoring my tension, Mike greeted me with a smile, and I felt relieved inside. Indeed, time seems to heal all wounds. Or so I thought, but I was wrong. "Just kidding. Who are you again, John?" Unfortunately, I don't remember insignificant side characters. Mike's voice echoed loudly in the still sparsely populated room. I felt the unpleasant sensation of sweaty palms, a feeling I remembered from decades ago. Mike hadn't changed at all, no matter how much time had passed. But similarly, I hadn't changed much either. Unable to retort, I tried to just smile it off, when suddenly, "Hey, John, long time no see." Hearing this voice from the door, I turned to look. There stood an elderly man, unrecognizable due to the passage of time. But somehow, I knew who he was. He was the only one who had extended a helping hand to me during our middle school days. "Edward, is that you?" When I guessed the name of the person, he replied, "Yeah, it's me. Long time no see," and came towards me, naturally distancing me from Mike. Edward had always been kind to me when I was down because I couldn't stand up to Mike. These memories, buried deep in my mind, began to resurface. Watching Edward and me, Mike laughed and said, "Ah, I remember now. The dull duo pretending to be friends. Even after 40 years, you haven't changed a bit, leading such low-level lives. As a company president with status and fame, it's like a different world to me." At 60, I never thought I'd feel the need to prove myself or avoid losing to someone. But being sarcastically spoken to like that, I felt a mix of frustration and shame. But I've never been good at talking back. Edward, being a kind soul, never argued and just quietly moved away from Mike, and we tried to forget the unpleasantness together. The dynamic hadn't changed easily over time. Just then, Edward calmly retorted, "Isn't there no level in life? Everyone's different, so there's no need to compare." Edward replied in a remarkably calm tone. Surprised, I looked at Edward. It seemed Mike was equally surprised and quickly came back with a rebuttal. "People who lead bottom-tier lives justify themselves like that, otherwise they'd feel miserable enough to die." I heard Edward, "You only finished middle school. You probably haven't landed any significant job." Mike had always been good at striking where it hurts. But Edward, unlike me, seemed different now. "I don't know what you consider a significant job, but I believe I've fulfilled my duty until my recent retirement." Edward said this proudly. But Mike continued, "Being forced to retire already in an era where the retirement age is 65, that's proof you're useless. Stop pretending already." Mike sneered as he said this, but then other classmates arrived, and the conversation ended there. In the past, I would have only felt frustrated, but now it was different. Edward's presence made me feel somewhat relieved. It turned out to be a pleasant reunion after all. Everyone was so aged that we couldn't recognize each other until introductions were made. As the drinks flowed and the evening progressed, we slowly recaptured our old feelings. Though it started with reopening old wounds, I was glad I came. I ended up sitting next to Edward for the duration of the event. So, we talked about what each of us had been up to during the time we hadn't seen each other. We talked about what we had been up to, work, family. We weren't talkative people originally, but after 40 years, we had endless conversations. Edward had changed in many ways, like being able to stand up to Mike, but his fundamentally kind and gentle nature remained the same. That was somewhat reassuring. As the evening drew to a close, Mike, emboldened by alcohol, began loudly boasting about his exploits like tales of valor. Despite being somewhat distant from Edward and me, Mike, perhaps still affected by the earlier incident, kept directing his attention our way. "I'm now the owner of a top-tier hotel. Everyone surely knows its name, that hotel, since I was always excellent from a young age. Everyone must have expected me to achieve something, but to attain a status beyond expectations and make my classmates proud, right, Edward?" Mike insisted on bragging, always steering the conversation our way. "That's incredible, indeed," Edward responded, showing his magnanimity and acknowledging Mike's success. This seemed to irk Mike, who continued his sarcasm. "Just because we're classmates, I can't give you any special treatment. It's a hotel too expensive for poor people like you. It's meant for the real elite." Yet, Edward, unfazed, simply replied, "I see, got it." I wondered how Edward had acquired such firm resolve. I was genuinely curious about it. It was a question I just couldn't get out of my mind. Annoyed that Edward didn't take the bait, Mike then began a more dubious tale. You can top the industry just by doing regular business. Can you simpletons even imagine how I climbed to the top? He posed the question to our classmates, and seeing everyone tilting their heads in confusion, he seemed quite satisfied. Then, he uttered words that should never have been said. You keep it hidden. Money matters don't go public if you don't talk about them. If you hide it well, tax evasion or anything else is easy. Only smart people like me can climb up high. You guys probably don't have the guts for it. That's why you're just poor ordinary people. Mike, drunk and red-faced, seemed to enjoy this conversation. The other classmates just listened with dismay. That's quite a story, I muttered softly to Edward. Then, I realized something important. Once I had realized it, I couldn't just stay silent, so I immediately stood up. Mike, you should probably stop talking about that. I could feel the blood drain from my face in this unexpected situation. But I doubt anyone around me could guess why I was so anxious. Except for Edward, sitting next to me. However, Mike ignored this final warning and continued to recount his misdeeds as if they were tales of valor. Can't stand hearing about a world so different from yours. Pathetic. Instead, such remarks only made him more boastful. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I didn't want to justify criminal behavior or defend Mike, who had been a nuisance since middle school. But the more Mike spoke, the more I sweated. Unable to bear it any longer, I interrupted him. Mike, Edward was a high-ranking police officer. If you keep going. My words echoed in the hall, silencing everyone. Mike, who had been enjoying his story, turned pale. He knew the gravity of having a police officer overhear these conversations. Edward then stood up and said, as I mentioned earlier, I've always taken pride in my job and fulfilled my duty. That pride doesn't change even after retirement. I can't overlook such talk of wrongdoing. Appropriate action will be taken. Gathering his belongings, Edward prepared to leave. Mike, his earlier bravado gone, desperately followed Edward. Wait, we're classmates, right? It was just a joke to liven up the mood. Please overlook it, I beg you. But Edward replied, classmates or not, I can give you special treatment. You said that yourself earlier. We'll see if it's a lie or not after an investigation. Goodbye. As Edward walked away, Mike collapsed to the ground. Damn it, damn, he cried in a voice too hard to listen to. Later, Mike's company was raided by the police. Indeed, they found evidence of tax evasion, just as he had boasted, leading to his arrest. I heard about this when I met with Edward later. That's when I asked him something I'd been curious about. How he had gained such strong willpower. The idea of Edward, who had only a middle school education and was average in studies, becoming a high-ranking police officer had initially shocked me. I was deeply interested in what had happened to him after graduating from middle school. And his answer was something I never expected. After middle school, when you, my friend, were being bullied, I, too weak, couldn't do anything to help. That feeling of helplessness and shame stayed with me. I couldn't dream or envision a future for myself, so after graduating, I left home and wandered aimlessly, essentially becoming homeless. Then, a police officer approached me. As we talked, I was inspired to become strong, to right wrongs, and to protect others. I wanted to become someone who could defend a friend in trouble. So, in a way, it's thanks to you, John. Haha. No way, that's exaggerating. I guess I need to be a bit stronger myself. How about I teach you some self-defense next time? We can have you getting mig now, can we? The long-held thoughts of a friend who was supposed to be closest to me, spanning decades. Knowing this made me incredibly happy. Once you reach the age of 60, it's easy to think that people's lives don't change significantly anymore. That's what I believed. But I was wrong. The paths we take in our 60 years of life, for better or worse, diverge. And this is likely the same whether we're 70 or 80. So, I'll continue to walk a straight path, even if it's ordinary, one that I won't be ashamed of in front of others. Reuniting with an old friend made me realize this. I'm a 22-year-old chef specializing in pasta. Though I refer to myself as a chef, this field is deeply complex. I am still learning, working as an apprentice in the kitchen where I'm employed. However, my ultimate goal is to master the art of pasta making and create delicious dishes. This aspiration began when I was looking for work after leaving junior high, and the owner of the local pasta restaurant, who I'll refer to as John, offered me a chance. Having been raised by a single father, I frequently had dinner at this restaurant whenever my dad was late getting home. Thus, the flavor of the pasta from this establishment holds a special place in my heart, a sentiment I cherish and wish to preserve. As John lacks a successor, I dedicate myself to training each day to maintain that unique taste. One day, after parking my bicycle outside the shop following a delivery. "Hey, is that you, Jason?" Hearing this, I quickly turned around. There stood a person with a somewhat familiar, yet unrecognizable, face. Given that he knew my name, he must be an acquaintance, but I couldn't place him. Then he said, "Hey, don't you remember? I'm Brandon, your old classmate from junior high." That triggered my memory. "Oh, Brandon, you've changed so much, I hardly recognized you." It's no surprise I didn't immediately recognize him. Brandon had transformed significantly since junior high. The Brandon in front of me now was tall, smartly dressed, and carried himself like a successful business professional. However, back in junior high, Brandon was quite different, small, reserved, and not particularly noticeable in class. We lived nearby and often chatted, but I hadn't seen him since we graduated. I had heard he attended prestigious high schools and colleges. But I never expected such a drastic change. "What are you doing here?" Brandon inquired, and I responded promptly. "Oh, I work here at the restaurant." Brandon laughed and commented, "Really? Working at this shabby place?" His remark was frankly disrespectful. "Yeah, but you used to come here too, remember?" I remembered us both visiting this place when our parents were delayed. Brandon then said, "That's all behind me now. I've moved on. It's surprising, Jason, to see you still frequenting such a modest establishment in this small town." Huh? I couldn't comprehend why Brandon would speak to me in such a manner. It was evident he wasn't interested in a friendly conversation. Brandon wasn't like this in the past. What had changed him? More importantly, I couldn't let his disparaging comments about the shop slide. It's disrespectful to speak like that in front of the shop. If that's all you have to say, I'd appreciate it if you left. Brandon replied, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I just felt pity for you, being in such a situation. Well, take care." He left, leaving behind those unpleasant words. True, the exterior of our restaurant isn't impressive. Originally opened by John's father, it still occupies the same old building. But the quality of our pasta is excellent, something even Brandon should acknowledge despite the shop's appearance. It was disheartening to reunite with an old friend only to find him so changed and unpleasant, but if he can only offer negativity, I'd rather not cross paths with him again. Yet, just a few days later, Brandon showed up once more. "Welcome, Brandon." Just before closing time, who should walk in but Brandon? Dressed as sharply as before, he seemed like a different person. "Hey, thought I'd try some pasta here for the first time in a while," he said. With no option but to serve him, I brought the ordered pasta to Brandon. Then, after finishing his meal, Brandon remarked, "This taste brings back memories." I was relieved. He didn't seem sarcastic today. Perhaps he was just in a bad mood during our last encounter, and this was his way of making amends. Feeling somewhat cheered, I responded, right. As he was leaving, I encouraged him, feel free to come back anytime. You might be accustomed to more upscale dining, but I think our place has its unique appeal. Oh, thanks, he replied. After this, Brandon extended an unexpected invitation. Actually, we're planning a junior high reunion next month. I'd like you to come, Jason. Here are the details. Since leaving junior high, my focus had been on mastering pasta making, leaving little time for socializing with friends. So, the prospect of reuniting with old classmates was a delightful surprise. Really, I'll definitely be there. Thanks for the invite. I immediately informed John and decided to take the day off for the class reunion. When was the last time I had enjoyed a meal with friends? With a sense of anticipation, I went to the agreed-upon location on the day. However, upon arrival, I felt a twinge of regret. The venue was an upscale traditional restaurant. I hadn't expected such an elegant setting and had dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans. Although fashion isn't my forte, I knew I should have chosen something more suitable for the occasion. Should I go back and change? But it was nearly time to meet. Lost in thought, I heard, "Hey, Jason." I turned and saw Brandon. "Hey, Brandon. Thanks for making it," he said. I couldn't back out now. However, Brandon and the other arriving classmates, clad in jackets and dresses, made my casual attire seem out of place. "Sorry, I completely forgot to mention the dress code," Brandon apologized. I brushed off the situation with a laugh. "Looks like it. I feel somewhat underdressed and embarrassed." This helped ease the awkwardness, and the nearby classmates laughed, making me feel a bit more at ease. But Brandon's next comment stunned me. "Even if you knew the dress code, Jason, you wouldn't have anything appropriate, right? Guys, did you know he's working at that old restaurant I visited recently? It's as outdated and shabby as ever. It's like a relic from a bygone era." I had to hold back my laughter. The classmates erupted in laughter. I had hoped Brandon had changed. But he was again making disparaging remarks, just like when we reconnected. His demeanor fluctuated each time we met, and I couldn't fathom his motives. As I took my seat, Brandon's behavior dampened my enjoyment of the reunion. The dynamic among the others was strange too, as if they were vying for Brandon's favor. I hadn't continued to high school, but I realized that everyone present had attended the same high school as Brandon. While pondering whether something had transpired during their high school years. "Hey, Jason, it's been a while." Ethan approached me and said. With most classmates gravitating towards Brandon, I candidly asked Ethan, "Don't you find Brandon and the others' behavior odd? Did something happen in high school?" Ethan responded, "I wasn't in the same class, so I'm not sure, but after Brandon's father became the principal in our first year, Brandon grew more arrogant. It's a competitive school, and falling out with Brandon was seen as problematic. Since then, everyone's behaved this way. It seems the old pecking order still influences them, even after graduation." This shed light on Brandon's domineering attitude and the others' conduct. Yet, I still couldn't fully understand his harshness towards me. The party progressed smoothly, and I mostly conversed with Ethan. As it neared its end, Brandon approached me. "Having a good time?" he inquired. Concealing my mixed emotions, I replied, "Well, yes, it's been enjoyable." Then Brandon remarked, "I'm relieved. I was worried that someone like you, accustomed to simpler meals, wouldn't appreciate the cuisine at a place this upscale. It's surprising you have similar tastes to ours." He said this loudly enough for everyone to hear, eliciting laughter from the classmates. "Why are you doing this? Are you trying to belittle me?" I questioned. "Aha, you caught on. Not bad for a junior high dropout," Brandon quipped with a smirk. I was stunned. How could he so casually insult me for being less affluent and not completing school? What on earth do you have against me? It's been nearly 10 years since we last met, right? Unable to tolerate this any longer, I confronted Brandon directly. Then he whispered, audible only to me, "Don't act naive. You always looked down on me in junior high. You might have thought you were being kind to me, the short, quiet kid, but you were just patronizing. I was aware of it. Despite your own struggles, you acted superior. I've always held a grudge for that." What? I never looked down on him. I couldn't remember ever condescending anyone. But no matter what I said, Brandon remained unconvinced. "See, that's your problem, always pitying me. You thought you were better because of your tough upbringing. It's sad, just your presence annoys me," he said angrily. I always thought of Brandon as a friend, but he had perceived our relationship differently. Even though it was years ago, it still hurt. "So today, I invited you here to embarrass you, and you claim to be enjoying yourself. Are you really that oblivious? Your poverty is suffocating. Just leave." At that moment, I realized the truth. I had been excited to see my old classmates, but I was never truly welcome. It wasn't that Brandon and any others had changed. It was me who remained the same. "All right, I get it. I'll leave," I said, accepting the situation. There was no point in staying any longer. I gathered my things to leave quietly. "Oh, look at you, so compliant. That's a loser's attitude. You'll just embarrass this place with your appearance, so better sneak out." Brandon jeered, and the classmates laughed. Just as I was about to exit, "Please stop, you are disturbing the other guests," a voice intervened. It was Eleanor, the owner of the upscale restaurant. Brandon was taken aback but quickly retorted, "See, even she thinks you're a nuisance. Hurry up and go." However, Eleanor corrected him. "You're mistaken. The real disturbance is your behavior. Your derogatory remarks are upsetting our valued regular guest. I can't overlook this." A regular, someone in another private room. They couldn't possibly hear us, Brandon argued. Eleanor clarified, "No, I'm referring to Jason, who's trying to leave. He often visits with John from the restaurant. Despite being young, his dedication to pasta making is admirable. While you were relying on your parents, he was working hard. Mocking that isn't funny. It's commendable. Your education might be impressive, but you lack basic understanding and empathy." Indeed, John had frequently brought me to this restaurant. It wasn't just for the cuisine, but also to learn about the exceptional service. Eleanor's support was unexpected but deeply appreciated. "You, how dare you speak to a customer like that? I won't return here," Brandon exclaimed, visibly offended. Eleanor responded calmly, "That's fine. We prefer guests who respect others." Brandon left the restaurant, visibly frustrated. The other classmates followed him out, all except for Ethan. "Thank you so much, Eleanor." When I expressed my gratitude, Eleanor smiled and said this, "It's okay. I couldn't bear to see a hard-working young man like you be demeaned. You're dedicated to your path. Remember, you have nothing to be ashamed of." Her words were warmer and more comforting than anything I'd heard from anyone else before. I had chosen my own path in life and tried my best to follow it. Sometimes, I struggled with feelings of inferiority because of my background in a single-parent, low-income household and having to work since junior high. But Eleanor's words were a revelation, showing me that there's no reason to harbor such thoughts. Now, I'm more confident in continuing my journey, trusting in the path I've chosen for myself. Eleanor's encouraging words will always hold a special place in my heart.